On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Operation Prosperity Guardian is in full force in and around the Red Sea. The question is, whose prosperity is being guarded? Hi, I'm your host, Al Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So that title took me about 50 times to get straight. It's a mouthful, but it's an important one because the question really arises. Operation Prosperity Guardian, this multinational force that's out in the Red Sea right now protecting commercial shipping, is doing an amazing job at thwarting attacks by the Houthi, but some attacks are getting through. And we're just right now seeing the return of some container lines led by Maersk coming back into the Red Sea. And it raises that question, whose prosperity is being guarded? I actually dealt with 4 specific questions in the op-ed I just had posted over to G-Captain. We're going to take a look at that article, talk about it, and break down those 4 questions. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So let's take a quick view at what's going on right now. This is brought to us by Marine Traffic. A lot of AIS systems out there. I use Marine Traffic. I find it to be the best source out there. And a couple of things you should note right here, obviously. Trade coming out of the Straits of Malacca here between Malaya and Indonesia will branch, and that's typical. You always see this big branch right here. Part of it will head westward, heading toward either the southern tip of India and Sri Lanka, and then either up to the Persian Gulf or over into the Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandab, that narrow little strait between Yemen and Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, where we've seen a lot of these attacks, and into the Red Sea and up to the Suez. Notice a lot of red here. A lot of red heads up to the Persian Gulf. Those are tankers. A lot of red and green mixed in here heading to the Suez. But when you look down here at that southern route that heads from the Straits of Malacca down to the southern coast of Africa, it's almost entirely green. These are container ships, bulk carriers, a lot of dry store goods that are moving around. If we zoom in to the Bab el-Mandab, again, narrow little strait here. It's about 20 miles wide across here, but only about 10 miles are navigable. You can see the coast of Yemen here. This is where the Houthi are located, right here on this western shore of Yemen. And what we're seeing is attacks right along this entire stretch right here. A lot of ships still going through the Bab el-Mandab. A lot of freighters, a lot of tankers still going through. One of the things you will note when you get on here is you'll notice ships are IDing themselves. So for example, this vessel right here, the Mahayaya, is an Indian flag vessel, and you'll note it has on there for a destination Iran Armed Guards. And you'll see a lot of vessels going through this area with the identification of armed guards on board. If we change this now just to show container ships over 8,000 TEU, TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. That's the basic measurement you use for container ships. The picture gets a lot more interesting. So if we look out here in the Indian Ocean, we see some ships heading that way. The Maersk, CMA CGM Nevada heading that way. APL Vanda, the CMA CGA Tage. Over here is the Chastine Maersk. Madison Maersk heading that way. You can see the Maersk Hangzhou heading that way. So we're starting to see ships divert that way. COSCO Shipping Kilimanjaro is heading up into that region. And then more significantly, if you look up here in and around the Red Sea, we have several ships that are in the Red Sea right now, CMA CGM Hermes. But more importantly, look out here in the Mediterranean, a whole slew of ships, largely Maersk ships, all heading to the Suez. We're seeing about a dozen Maersk container ships all heading in. And this goes hand in hand with the announcement by Maersk that they are starting to resume traffic on a limited basis through this region. This is the Maersk advisory that was updated on Christmas Eve. With the OPG initiative in operation, we are preparing to allow for vessels to resume transit through the Red Sea, both eastbound and westbound. We are currently working on plans for the first vessel to make the transit and for this to happen as soon as operationally possible. While doing so, ensuring the safety of our employees is of the utmost importance and our #1 priority. So this is the op-ed I just had posted today, December 27th, over to G-Captain, talking about whose prosperity is being guarded. And I opened it up talking about the decision by Maersk Lines to bypass the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. They were the first shipping line, along with Hauppauge, to do it. And it had to do with the attack on a specific vessel, the Maersk Gibraltar. And Maersk Gibraltar is an unremarkable container ship, 10,100 TEUs. It is about half the size of the really big, ultra-large container vessels out there, built in 2016. The ship is Hong Kong flagged, Chinese owned, so it had a lot of issues. One of the things that Yemen and the Houthi have been talking about is the fact that they're only attacking Israeli owned and Israeli destined ships. Well, this is a perfect example of a ship that doesn't fit that criteria. And I did a quick little summary of what's been going on here with the war. So if you need to get back up to date with it, you can. But one of the things I highlighted was an operation that took place right just before Christmas, where the U.S. convoyed 4 U.S. flagships through the Bab el-Mandeb, 2 heading south, 2 heading north. And of the 4, 3 of them were ships of Maersk Line Limited. Maersk Line Limited is the American subsidiary of Maersk Lines, which is owned by A.P. Moller over in Denmark. Maersk Line Limited, it's a separate company. It has its own board. It's completely separate from A.P. Moller and Maersk Lines Limited, but it carries the moniker of Maersk Line and has a connection to them. And they were able to get U.S. Navy to escort 4 of their ships, the Maersk Kensington, the Maersk Sentosa, and the Maersk Selatar, through along with another U.S. ship, the Green Bay. And this was really the first convoy we saw initiated by the United States. And it was a full-force convoy. The U.S. Put all its effort into it. We had a carrier strike group, the Eisenhower Strike Group. There was a cruiser guarding the carrier. There were 5 destroyers. It was, without a doubt, I mean, I had no doubt that the U.S. Navy could do this. It's overwhelming force, and they were able to demonstrate and safely move through. Now, it did take time. Some of the ships, like the Kensington, for example, was waiting over a week for this to happen, which I think did raise a bit of concern about the ship drifting around in the Red Sea, waiting for it to happen. At the same time, other nations, France in particular, began convoying themselves. We saw them move through a convoy of CMA CGM ships. CMA CGM is a French line. And so the Languedoc began this. This is their frigate in the area, a Frem frigate. They brought through the CMA CGM Aqaba, and then later on the George Washington, and then the APL Salala. APL is owned by Neptune Orient, which is owned by CMA CGM. And so we saw the operation take place, and it was a huge success. We have seen since then numerous other convoy operations, one on December 25th. We just had a recent one take place where USS Laboon was bringing through several vessels, and in the process of bringing them through, aircraft off the Eisenhower engaged both drones and missiles. In the process, we saw several ships get hit, including 2 tankers, a Norwegian and an Indian flag tanker. And then in a subsequent operation, we saw a MSC, a Mediterranean Shipping Company ship, get hit, the Unity 8. And so there's a lot going on here in terms of escorting vessels and other ships getting hit. Same time, we're seeing a lot of things take place outside the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb. We have the seizure of the motor vessel Ruin. This is that Bulgarian-owned Maltese-flagged bulk carrier that was seized by quote-unquote Somali pirates. I tend to think they're Somali privateers working for the Houthi because of the indication we got when they tried to seize the motor tanker Central Park. And then we saw a series of ships attacked out in the Arabian Sea. Initially, it was the CMA CGM Simi, and then a Liberian-flagged tanker, the Chem Pluto. That has resulted in both the Indian and Pakistani navies taking up position in the Arabian Sea to protect shipping. To get the Indians and Pakistanis to do something together takes a unique thing, and only the Iranians seem to be able to do that. But that comes back to the big issue here, which is Maersk moving the needle. Maersk's decision to announce this comes immediately after the U.S. ramrodded 3 of the Maersk Line Limited ships through the Bab el-Mandeb. That told Maersk that the U.S. can do this. They can bring ships in. And so they announced their decision to go ahead and bring their ships through. Now, I should take a moment and step back for a second and talk about why the container liners are the big ones that are boycotting this. If you look at the other trade going on, tankers, LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, liquefied natural gas, LNG, bulkers, they still seem to be going through in pretty large numbers, although there are some LNG carriers that are avoiding the area. But the reason that container liners are doing it, particularly the big container liners are doing it, is because of insurance. So in the piece, I included this little statistic. If you have a Suez Max tanker, and a Suez Max tanker could carry up to about 1,000,000 barrels of oil. A barrel of oil is 42 gallons. And Suez Max is about the largest size tanker you can take through the Suez. If you take a 1,000,000 barrel tanker, and right now oil is selling at right around $80 a barrel if you look at Brent crude, that means the cargo on a tanker is about $80 million. Now understand, to go through this region, you need war risk insurance. Now, when this all started, war risk insurance was about 0.02% of the value of the ship and cargo. Well, since the attacks took place, it went up to 0.7%. And when you start talking about 0.7% of $80 million, you're talking about an amount that is sizable, but it's not enough to deter or make it less cost effective to go around Africa. However, container ships are a lot different because of the cargo they carry. If you take a 10,000 TEU ship like the Maersk Gibraltar, or if you take a 20,000 TEU vessel like some of the big Evergreen ships or MSC ships or COSCO ships, you start talking about cargoes that are in the range of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $500 million. And if you take a ship, a container ship that has a $500 million worth of cargo at 0.7% war risk insurance, that's $3.5 million you're paying to go through there. That is a large payment to go through. Plus, the danger to the container ship of strikes by drones, by cruise missiles, by ballistic missiles is much more significant, I'd argue, than to a tanker or a bulk carrier. Hit a tanker, hit a bulk carrier, they seem to be able to absorb damage a lot better than a container. The fear on the container ship is fire. Now, liquefied petroleum, liquefied natural gas have all other issues associated with them. You really don't want to puncture tanks that are super cooled because you will have an explosion or at least fire of an epic kind. But in terms of container ships, and particularly once you have fires on board, they're very hard to get under control. We've seen numerous container ship example fires like this. So their decision has been basically to sail around the area. So this brings me to the 4 questions I raised in this article that I think are important to ask. So first, the effort exerted by the U.S. was initially for U.S. flag vessels, which were part of what's called the Maritime Security Program. Those 4 U.S. vessels each receive $5 million a year from the U.S. government to be U.S. flagged, plus most of them were carrying Department of Defense cargo on board. The question should be asked, should Operation Prosperity Guardian, largely supported by the U.S. Navy, provide the escort services for A.P. Moller Maersk? A.P. Moller Maersk is based in Denmark. Most of these ships are going to be registered in Denmark, and yet Denmark's entire contribution to Operation Prosperity Guardian is a single staff officer, probably the liaison to Maersk Lines. This raises the question then, should the United States be doing this? Everybody argues that the U.S. Navy's mission is freedom of the seas, and we have been advocating that for a long time, but it's really freedom of the seas for the United States. And what we have seen historically is, if you go to the tanker war of the 1980s, the U.S. did not get involved in that until Kuwait reflagged their tankers U.S. registry in 1987. Even during the height of Somali piracy, the U.S. did not get involved beyond patrolling until U.S. flag vessels were directly attacked, Maersk, Alabama, and Captain Phillips. And then finally, this most recent attack was we just drove through Maersk Line limited ships of U.S. registry. Now the question becomes, does the U.S. provide this? Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't or they shouldn't, but that's a question that needs to be asked, because one of the reasons ships are registered under the Danish International Registry, which is a second flag of Denmark, and countries like Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands, is they don't pay taxes largely. And a lot of those taxes that they're not paying go to things like, defense and navies. So should the U.S. Navy be underwriting this? Because again, this is dealing with getting the Maersk cargo flowing again and other container liners. Number 2, will the defensive convoying be sufficient to see the resumption of normal traffic through the Red Sea and, most importantly, mitigate the higher war risk insurance caused by the Houthi? Understand, what the U.S. and the allied navies have been doing is defensive. We haven't struck the Houthi in Yemen. We are countering what the Houthi are throwing at us, which means that as long as the Houthi are being rearmed and re-equipped by Iran and whoever else is supporting them, They can keep flinging things at us all day long. You are basically playing defense. And sooner or later, by the way, if you play defense long enough, you're going to get hit, whether it's going to be commercial ships or potentially a warship. And the question here is, does what the U.S. Navy just recently did mean that the companies like Maersk, who haven't sent their ships through yet, by the way, no one has sent the ships through with Maersk lines yet. Some of the other ones, CMA, CGM, have gone through. What kind of war risk insurance are they getting? Have they gotten lower war risk insurance because of what the militaries are doing? Or are they going to charge extremely higher premiums to those who have cargo on board to get through? Because all those shipping agreements have little subsections in them that include you will pay any excess for costs incurred. Third, we have an entire carrier strike group and the majority of an amphibious ready group in the area. But should an incident occur elsewhere, they could be withdrawn and expose any shipping continuing to sail through the region or return. How long will and can the U.S. maintain this level of escort? Understand that Eisenhower went out to relieve the Ford. The Ford is on an extended deployment. When Ford has to return back to the U.S., will Eisenhower have to go up to the Mediterranean? We just saw an operation where F-18s off the Eisenhower shot down a batch of drones and missiles. What if they're not there anymore? What if something happens out in the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf that requires the Eisenhower to be there? What if things heat up in the South Pacific and Eisenhower has to move across the Indian Ocean? There's a lot of what ifs here. Can the U.S. maintain? There's no doubt the U.S. can maintain this if they want to. They can underway replenish. They can do this. But keeping a ship at sea for long periods of time does eventually degrade the platform. We have had records of keeping ships at sea, 200 and something days at sea. But ask the crew members how they enjoyed that. And then look at the post maintenance analysis of what it took to put those ships back together again. It's extremely costly and really reduces the overall readiness and operational ability of the ships. And even if we do, we can maintain this with just destroyers. We've got a batch of Burke-class destroyers. But again, we're shooting off SM-2s at a very high rate against drones that are very cheap and easy to manufacture. Do we keep this up forever? And that goes to the last question. The root of this issue is the Israeli-Hamas conflict. And it doesn't appear that a defensive strategy, as we're doing right now, is deterring the Houthis. And obviously the way to fix this is peace in the Middle East, but that's kind of tough. And if we don't have peace in the Middle East, if the underlying issue is still Israel and Hamas and Palestine, does this conflict continue and will it expand? What we just seen with the Iranian strike against a Liberian-flagged tanker out in the Arabian Sea is not an indicator that this is actually ratcheting down. And this could actually expand outward. And I go into the conclusion here, and I kind of wrap this all together, but I want to end you with the last point I have on here. The goal of Operation Prosperity Guardian is to ensure the prosperity of the world by ensuring the free flow of goods and ships through the international waterways off the coast of Yemen. If the main beneficiary of this operation is one of the largest shipping corporations in the world, then there is a question of whose prosperity is Operation Prosperity Guardian truly guarding. And I think that's a really important question because there's no doubt we're enjoying the prosperity of global trade. We do. But understand, we will still get trade if it has to go around the Cape of Good Hope, around the southern tip of Africa. If it has to bypass this region and go all the way down Africa down here, we're still going to prosper from it. It's going to cost a little bit more, and we're going to see inflation, and we're already seeing that. Understand, Maersk Lines and all the big container companies, the 9 big container companies, which control 85% of the world's containers afloat, are in the process right now of renegotiating the rate from Europe to Asia. This is the long-term rate. This is the 70% of containers that move this way are under long-term rates. And January 1st is when that rate goes away. And they have to go and set the new rate. And if that new rate takes into account a very much longer trip, it's going to be a lot higher. And if all of a sudden things clear up in the Red Sea and they can start going through, they're locked in at a long-term rate that's more profitable for them. Container liners have a lot of excess ships. They've been buying ships like crazy because of the influx of cash they had from the supply chain crisis. They've got new ships coming online. They were dealing with a downturn in freight rates, what Zentia called a bleak outlook for 2024. Well, the outlook isn't as bleak now in 2024. So we can't just look at the military issue. Yes, we're knocking down Houthi drones and cruise missiles like crazy, and we can all high five ourselves that we're doing a great job in defeating the Houthi, but stuff's still getting through. We're seeing ships hit, and we haven't seen anybody killed yet. We haven't seen anybody injured. We haven't seen any ships sunk yet. But there is a lot of questioning about the strategy. Do we maintain a defensive strategy here? What's the ulterior end game here for ending this? Because it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. We just seem to be catching Houthi missiles. And if you're the container liners, what's going on? I think Maersk has got a big play going on here. I think one of the reasons why you see over a dozen ships in the Mediterranean wanting to head back home to Asia is because they went through the Mediterranean. They went to the big ports of Algeciras and Tangier, scooped up all the empty containers they can get their hands on, and they want to reposition them back here to Asia so that they can load cargo. Because what's happening now is the ships that are on the long South African run are going to take longer to get back, which means there'll be a gap before those empty containers return. And if you have a gap, that means you can't load those containers as fast, which means you don't have cargo to go out. That creates a disruption. We saw that with the supply chain crisis when old LA and Long Beach were backed up and you couldn't get cargo out, and they weren't taking the empties out of LA and Long Beach until they were really required to. This is the Mediterranean swooping out containers, shipping them back so that Maersk can maintain this. There are less ships coming from the Indian Ocean side to the Red Sea than from the Mediterranean side. And I think that's significant. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you enjoy the op-ed. Be sure to go take a look at it over in GCaptain. Subscribe to their newsletter. Almost at 100,000 members on their newsletter. If you don't get that GCaptain newsletter, it's a daily thing that gives you a little bit of an update. If you really like the shipping updates that I provide, go over to GCaptain and go grab it. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you support the page? Well, you hit the super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon. You'll see the link in the show notes or on the end screen here, and you can become a monthly, yearly subscriber. You get access to early videos as they come out. As soon as I get them out, I'll have them posted over to Patreon, sometimes days before they're posted here, sometimes just minutes, but I'll always post to Patreon first. Until our next episode, this is Sal signing off. Oh, and be sure to check out our live episodes coming up later this week. On Thursday, Bruce Jones to Rule the Waves from Brookings. We'll be talking about the geopolitical situation in and around the Red Sea. And then on Friday, we have our first guest ever on GCaptain coming back for his yearly recap, John Conrad from GCaptain. Until our next episode, this is Sal signing off.